Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you here for one of our Alma Send webinars. And today we are talking about hiring considerations for immigrant talent and how that spans across both recruiting and mobility teams. So today I have two guest panelists for you. We've got Adrian Quintanilla from Indeed. He is the senior immigration specialist and is a former talent acquisition recruiter there. And then we also have Heather Myers from PayPal, who is currently a senior manager of talent acquisition specializing in university programs. So welcome to you both. And I would love for each of you to share a little bit about yourselves, and then we can dive into the questions that we have prepared for the discussion.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Heather Myers. As Emily mentioned, I am the Senior Manager of Talent Acquisitions, particularly in university recruiting. I've been at PayPal for 15 years. I started when we were eBay, saw ourselves through the split between eBay and PayPal, and then have been in the university recruiting space at a global level, hiring our interns and our recent graduates each year globally for about the past 13 years. So excited to be here. Thanks, Emily.
All right. Hope everybody's having a great day. So again, my name is Adrian. I started with Indeed roughly, it's going to be 10 years in October. I joined there, as Emily mentioned, over in the recruitment side of things, roughly around 2019, just right before COVID, joined the global immigration team where I focused on, well, at the time we were still covering US immigration. And so my focus at that point was the perm process, which is essentially the green card process for our employees. Then we transitioned into just focusing on global immigration. And currently, my focus is just helping transition into our global right to work program. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and welcome to you both. And for everyone who doesn't know me yet, my name is Emily Rowley, and I am the Global Mobility Partner of America's Immigration at PayPal. I've been with PayPal for about 2.5 years, but I've been working in the realm of immigration and global mobility for over 13 years, and I am also the Alma Send resident. So I'm happy to bring you all this panel webinar and hope that it is super informative for you. With that, let us get started into our discussion. My first question for Heather and Adrian is, what is the global mobility function versus the talent acquisition function? How do they differ and how do they overlap? Whoever wants to share first can jump right in.
I guess I can go ahead and jump in. So yeah, I mean, they both essentially they overlap, and Heather will kind of touch this on from her side as well. But specifically for this population, we deal with any employees who are in need of sponsorship. Okay, and so from a mobility standpoint, that would include just global immigration, specifically U.S. immigration if they need it, and then also relocation if it comes to that. But yeah, turn it over to
Yeah,
Heather.
so we oversee most of, obviously the hiring of new talent, and that really does include ensuring that we're able to hire that particular talent. You don't want to go down the rabbit hole of going through interview to having your manager being really excited about someone, only to find out that you're actually unable to hire them for one reason or other. Majority of those reasons typically are due to immigration status. That particular job that you might be hiring for might not support someone on work authorization at that time. So really getting up front, discussing with your managers, discussing with global mobility and your employment, whoever is overseeing your legal side of the house. Usually at PayPal, we have a external legal team that oversees our immigration portion. Getting up in front of it right away, ensuring that somebody does have the qualifications, and then discussing it and working directly with your global mobility team is probably like the most important thing that you could do.
Nice. Thank you so much. Something that I want to point out here is that in the full corporate structure hierarchy of teams, the global mobility team can fall under a lot of different other teams depending on the preference of the particular company. So sometimes it will fall under talent acquisition, sometimes it falls under total rewards, sometimes it falls under human resources, etc. So, and sometimes it's sort of like its own function in smaller companies. And when we're looking at at the quantity of the ratio of an employee in working in global mobility or TA versus the number of foreign nationals that they're working with. A lot of times in a smaller company, that those responsibilities for global mobility might fall under someone who is also a recruiter and or is also an HR professional, and they could be seeing anywhere from it's a ratio of like one global mobility employee to 100 foreign nationals or 250 foreign nationals or more. And then on the TA side, a lot of times it should be maybe around like one recruiter for every 300 to 400 phone screenings, and then maybe 80 to 120 requisitions after the initial phone screening per recruiter. So you can see the ratio there is a little bit mixed, but the job duties are distinct between each of those functions. I just wanted to give a little extra context with data so that people can try to think about how that would work out from a quantitative perspective on their teams. And is there anything else that either of you want to share more on that subject before we move on? No?
We're good.
Okay. My next question is, why is it important for the two functions of talent acquisition and global mobility to have strong communication?
So I can start with that one. I think having a clear process outlined between you and either your global mobility team, your immigration specialist is critical. Emily and I actually, I think from the first week that she started at PayPal, met and really started partnering together and developing a new plan, a new process that will work for both of us. Understanding timelines, from a university hiring perspective, it's different than a normal corporate professional hiring timeline. So really understanding how each team operates, what each team needs to actually ensure a solid experience for the new hire, as well as ensuring that from a compliance or a risk perspective that we're buttoned up, that we have all of our ducks in a row and we know exactly what we need to do when we need to do it. So really outlining that timeline is critical. One other thought is, we're really dealing with somebody else's life here. So we want to make sure that we're accurate in all of our data collection, make sure that, we're partnering really, really closely together. So that way, if you're working off of a manual spreadsheet, if you're working off of something that, could cause human error, that you have those safeguards in place to ensure that human error is almost down to zero.
Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Heather. Yeah, go ahead,
yeah,
Adrian.
absolutely, Heather. Yeah, that's so important. And when you mention manual spreadsheets, oh, I'm scared of them of
Makes
the,
us
of this one.
twitch, but they're
But
definitely a beast, but we all do it.
yeah, but you're absolutely right. The communication does need to be, as close to flawless as possible. You are dealing with somebody's, potential start to a new career, right? And so one of the, most important parts, that we really try to drill on is just to ensure that, yeah, we do keep those open line of communications and for any recruiters, obviously, that are new to the company, ensuring that they also understand that, hey, global immigration or global mobility is pretty core to the onboarding process, and just ensuring that if you're like a one-man team, that's running a global mobility program, you got to ensure that you're kind of getting in front of a lot of these managers and directors and even individual recruiters. I love a good chance to talk to a recruiter and update them on our process whenever I get a chance. If there's ever a time that we come across a discrepancy or anything like that, not only for that, but also just to catch up on what the recruitment trends are. I haven't done recruitment in some time, but it's always a good time to dive into that. And that's essentially just how you build rapport, with everybody. In addition to that, though, to what Heather shared, you want this experience to go great. And, we absolutely put a ton of emphasis on the experience for the candidate and for a future employee, but it's also the experience for the manager and the recruiter themselves, right? You don't want to start an entire process, spend, weeks, months, however long your interview process is, just to wind up to the global immigration team showing up and saying, hey, we never ran an assessment on this person. And unfortunately, they don't, we don't sponsor for this role, where we don't, we come up to a situation where it just doesn't look good for anybody. And it's just a bad experience overall. And, it turns into now that, we have to withdraw, an offer, which is, things that it can get to that point, unfortunately. So, communication is absolutely key. I'll even take it a step further. Maybe not necessarily just your onboarding team, but if your company offers travel, and think of an example of, there's a team that we got introduced to a couple years ago that offers a trip to some of the employees who did well and kind of overachieved throughout the year. And unfortunately, there was an incident where we had a handful of people who weren't able to join in that trip due to visas and not being able to secure a travel visa in time. And so we then were able to turn a unfortunate situation into a learning experience. And the next trip for the next year, we were having meetings with the trip wasn't scheduled until the following summer, but we were having meetings with the director the September before, right? The year before, just to, start to speak to them in regards to, like, what the destination is going to look like, what the population is, just really a lot of details that kind of go into whether, how quickly somebody can obtain, a visa and stuff like that. So I don't want to drift off too far off of the onboarding process here, but just from a global mobility standpoint, it's absolutely important to just kind of get in front of anybody that you feel might need our services at one point, and just say, hey, we're here, we exist, and insert yourself early on in the process. And I promise you that that'll save a lot of headaches, downstream.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Thank you, Adrian. And I think that's a really good reminder for everyone here that's working in with a mobility function in some capacity, where even if we don't get it right necessarily the first time around, we can use those mistakes and inefficiencies as learning experiences to create better processes moving forward. And it's an opportunity really to build the relationships cross-functionally. So you can talk to your recruiter function, you can talk to HR, you can talk to the hiring managers or whoever else needs to be involved to improve the process. And that's really the mark of the strong communication, is being able to fix what was broken. So thank you. That was a really great example. I'm wondering if we could dive in a little bit more around what are the clear signs of a weak or strong relationship between functions.
So I've had experience with both, and so can give us a little, some insight to that. I think, years ago, we didn't have clear processes in place between understanding exactly, you submit the assessment, you submit the H-1B application for a new hire, and then it goes into a black hole, and we don't know what the heck happened. Lots of errors happened through that. We actually had someone that couldn't start with us when they were supposed to, just, 2 or 3 days with between start date and understanding that they were unable due to work authorization issues. So I think over the years, we really did put into place processes that worked for both teams, like I said before. But on top of that, catch-up calls. Emily and I do a lot of just quick emails, updates to, we thought this person was going to start, now they're not going to join us after all. And really always having that list on repeat, that phone call on repeat, maybe once a month, once a quarter, really developing that cadence of discussions with your partner is pretty critical. Another thing that we've also done to really ensure a strong relationship is just, what was it, probably like 2 years ago, I think, maybe 3, we developed an intern webinar. Interns are always very curious, very anxious about what their future holds once they join your company as a full-time employee. So to kind of take out a lot of the questions, Emily and her team actually developed an intern immigration session towards the end of each internship each year. And it really, really helped take out those question marks, take out the ambiguity around, if I'm doing all of this right stuff, everything right, and do I need to do anything else? Once you follow all the instructions, but sometimes you miss things. And I think that's where a lot of the anxiety for the interns to full-time employees lie. So we took that out and really addressed it head on, which I think has been so helpful to developing just, a great relationship, a great experience for that talent. I think even doing it with more developed professionals, would help as well. Just to, again, just take out that ambiguity, because when you read immigration law or work authorization statuses, anything in the H-1B, USCIS website, you have to be a really good lawyer to fully understand it like that. So really having that clear partnership, and I'm not one of those, so having that solid partnership to break it down to layman's terms really has helped and built a strong relationship for us.
Thank you, Heather. I'm actually going to comment on that
Yeah.
before Adrian jumps in with anything more. But I think the mark of the strong communication that we've been talking about was that the university recruiting team was even able to come to me in the first place and say, hey, we're seeing this gap in understanding with our intern population. And then I was able to say, okay, here's a proposed solution. What if we do this webinar? So because we already had that flow of communication, I was able to really hear the problem and then offer a solution. And so I think having the communication channel already in place and being
Yeah.
comfortable with sharing like, hey, this isn't working for my team or my population of foreign nationals, visa holders. And then it's easier for the global mobility team to problem solve from there. Adrian, was there anything more that you wanted to add on this subject?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So to, everything that Heather mentioned is on point, and to take it a little bit more into detail from my point of view. Yeah, we're absolutely always wanting to share more and more information, with our recruiters, to ensure that they do have like the most up-to-date information. Obviously, it's a lot, and so we understand that. So we try to make it as easy as possible. But, from a communication standpoint, just understanding that, I mean, at one point, I know it's slowed down quite a bit, but at one point, you had multiple companies competing for the same talent, right? And the talent pool was super competitive among the companies. And so being just super upfront about what the wait is going to look like, what the process is going to look like, obviously coming from also seeing it from a global standpoint, global immigration standpoint, not just the US, but every country has its own timelines. And so, we did have different templates that were divided by the country, and they were always up to date with the type of, what the timeline was going to look like for that candidate. And this was not just for the candidate to let them know, hey, look, we started the immigration process for you here. This is what this is going to look like, but also for the manager so that they can kind of stay aware of like, okay, because sometimes you may think if you're not familiar with the process, like, oh, they can start within 2 to 3 weeks. And it's like, hey, man, so, some of these processes can take up to 3 months, just to secure a work authorization, depending on the country. So, just being super informative upfront with the recruiters, and that's definitely built into the process. It's baked into it now to where they have the most up-to-date information. We also are just very open to them reaching out to us via email, via Slack. If there's anything that's pretty urgent, definitely encouraged. There are times where even we just hop onto a Zoom. It's very unofficial, but hey, let's talk it out, what's going on, and just to clarify a few things, and sometimes I know, it's like, oh, somebody's requesting a Zoom with me. Like, I don't want to take the time, but hey, those 5 to 10 minutes that it'll take for you guys to have, a quick one-on-one discussion and just to provide more clarification verbally, it'll save sometimes, up to 2 or 3 business days of back and forth emails, right? And especially if it's coming in late on a Thursday or Friday, and then they have to wait until Monday, and and don't get me started on if it's at the end of the quarter and they're trying to get this hire solidified, right? For to hit the number. So there's a lot of things that go into it, and so we just want to make sure that the experience is good for everybody, right? Not just you and me, but yeah, just the communication pieces. Can't stress that enough.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, if we could give just like a concise list of what would be the ramifications of a weak relationship so that people know what kind of warning signs to look out for if this is happening in their teams, what could we share with folks here?
Adrian, do you want to go, or do you want me to just
No,
give
feel
the
free.
list?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
top ones would be increased urgencies, compliance, legal risks, losing out on key talent due to start date delays, errors in immigration casework, things like that. Broken processes stay broken. Once you have a broken
Yeah.
process, you really, really need to work together to fix it. Low employment morale for both teams. Recruiters are getting hit by managers, and then equally we're going back to to our talent partners and our immigration partners wondering what the heck happened. And, sometimes it leads to, just undesirable working relationships. So stopping that in the tracks, being proactive really does help. So those would be my top. Any others that I'm missing?
Yeah, I want to hammer on that last one that you shared just a little more
Yeah.
out, because if you really dive into that, you can think about it as detailed as, there's a team that's had this position open for some time, and typically, at least at Indeed, the team members are usually also part of the interview process, and so the interview process can take a few weeks up to a few months in some cases. And in the meantime, they're trying to handle all of this workload, and which is why they have a job opening to begin with. And so if at the end of the day, their manager comes back even to them, to that team that just kind of went through this journey with the manager, with the new hire, maybe already swapped LinkedIn profile invites and everything, in your mind, it's like, oh, wow, we're finally getting a new team member. Workload is going to be distributed a little bit more evenly now. And then it just doesn't happen due to a communication breakdown that could have been resolved at the very beginning a few months ago when this journey started. That's a gut punch, not just to the candidate and to the recruitment team and to global mobility, but to the team that's expecting the new team member. Now they're left with like, dang, we got to start from square one. So that can be a bit of a gut punch. So that would probably be another reason.
Yes, great call outs. I want to share one with everyone because I think this one is a little bit lesser known, but is probably the most egregious penalty in terms of legal compliance and risk. It's called export control license. And so basically, there is a list of countries where if there is an employee that is coming from one of these countries who is a foreign-born national of one of those, and depending on the work that they are to be performing for the US entity from within the US, they could be in violation of export control. There is a licensing requirement, and I believe the fee to request the license is around $10,000. But the fines and the penalties for not pursuing the license are both criminal and civil. There are fines of up to $1 million. And then I think that's on the criminal side. And then on the civil side, they've actually increased the fee. A few years ago, it was around $250,000. It's now over it's almost $375,000, and jail time. This isn't jail time and fines for the foreign national. This is jail time and fines for anybody that was involved in the process, including anybody that saw the hiring and onboarding of the individual. So this is my warning to everyone about export control license. I've caught it a few times at different companies. Typically, if the person is coming from Iran, is usually where I see the most risk. If they have citizenship or permanent residence in another country, such as Canada, that does lessen the risk a little bit. But I wanted to really just call this one out because it's such a dramatic fine, and I certainly will not be going to federal prison on behalf of anyone's hire. So if you would like more information on this, I'm going to drop a link from a government website in the chat so you all can look into this more and see for yourselves what are the penalties and risks. And the only other thing that I will add about this regarding the ramifications of a weak relationship would be the personal impacts to the foreign nationals and themselves, because they're kind of in the throes of getting lost in communication between the different teams. And they'll say, well, my recruiter told me it was going to take this long, but now you, Global Mobility, are telling me it's going to take this long, and things like that. And so it's just a poor employee experience. But then it also could impact, like if they were ending a lease at a location A and they haven't yet signed their lease in location B, and there's a delay on either end of that, then of course that's going to impact their life outside of work, but very much still how they bring themselves to work and their quality of life overall. So that's
It
the only
also
other thing.
impacts, if I can just add to that, it also
Yeah.
impacts at what point they want to submit their notice with their current employer if they're joining a new
Yes.
team. That's heavily impacted. And so if they're caught in limbo and then submit it too soon, or and then they're left maybe jobless if it doesn't pan out, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
another
thank you. That's a
uh,
really important call out. I'm glad that you named that too. So, moving on to our next question for the group. What are, and I think this is another sort of like maybe shortish list, but I'm wondering what other things that can be accomplished in a company if there is a strong relationship. So, kind of like moving towards the light at the end of the tunnel here and seeing what are the positives if we do have a strong relationship between the talent acquisition and mobility functions.
Go ahead, Adrian. Take
Yeah,
that
I
one.
can start on this one.
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, cost savings is probably the one thing that jumps out, right? Is one of the first ones. You're able to go from point A to point B and throughout this journey, and it works out the way it's supposed to, right? All the time and effort that you dedicated to the process is it works out and it comes to fruition. That's like and that's what you want every process to be like. You only want to deal with the not so positive things if it's just a circumstance that was beyond your control, right? So it's important to, whenever you do run into those, you evaluate it and you then, if there's a way that you can prevent it in the future, bake it into your existing process. But yeah, so cost savings for sure. And really just continuing the process improvements, not just from your side, but from the recruitment side, right? Or whoever it is that you're working with, work together. It builds just a stronger rapport with your the cross function. It's just a lot easier to talk to one another, especially when if things do happen to go bad. It's not a, oh man, I have to speak to this person again. It's like, oh man, I can't wait to talk to this person so that we can figure out a solution for it. So there's different ways that can be approached, but if you have a great working relationship with somebody or with an entire team, that you're working with, it's a lot easier. Obviously, the experience, you don't want that to ever happen to anybody, but you also want to know that you have a team that's not your own team that you can work with to find a solution for it. So you guys aren't just, in there alone thinking you're, having to defend your team for this and your team for that. It be just it's not a good feeling. And I don't think that's a position that anybody would like to be in.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those are all good things to keep in mind. So, what would be your suggestions for those key steps in order to build strong cross-departmental relationships among the functions? We've talked about
So
some of
I,
them already, but I think it's good to
yeah.
just like
Yeah,
name them.
I think, like I had mentioned before, I think it was your first week. You may have asked somebody, all right, who heads up each department in recruiting? Because I need to
Yeah.
go directly to them and start talking with them. And, it was more like a listening tour and what worked well, what didn't work well, what were pain points, and just developing that working relationship and being like, okay, let's talk again and, in the next month or next 2 months and we'll figure, some of these pain points out. Like I think that was critical to establishing a really solid, working relationship. To piggyback on what Adrian said, every day is not going to be amazing and you're not going to have wonderful days. Things are going to break, something's going to go wrong, an email is going to be misconstrued or misunderstood. Having that relationship for a quick 2-minute phone call, 5-minute phone call, if you really want to like really debrief and laugh about it after you figure it all out, really goes a long way. So it's just so much easier to just pick up a phone call rather than to continue those emails, So I think that's a key step.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, if you're still working in office with people, you just say hi, go go up to them, say hi. Hey,
Yeah.
I'm the person on the other side of that email. How's it going? Let's meet, let's chat. I know we just went through this process. Do you have any questions? I mean, just, open up the dialogue,
Mhm.
and kind of start from there, really. And then just keep it open to how Heather said,
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be a daily thing that you reach out every single day to somebody, but if you keep something in just a monthly cadence and check
Mhm.
up on things or just to share any trends, if there's people that are, especially directors or managers that are struggling to find maybe local talent and are, maybe considering hiring talent that they need to get work authorization approval for, share some insights with them. I'm sure that in itself will go a long way.
Mhm.
But yeah, just keep those communication lines open,
Mhm.
and it'll just go. Like, you'll end up to a point where you're talking about about personal items at the beginning of the meeting because you guys just know each other so well, and then you dive into the, the nitty gritty. But once you get to that point, I think at that point you guys have a pretty solid relationship. So.
Yeah, that's a good call out. I will also say this doesn't only apply to the mobility and recruiting functions. This can also work for other functions as well. So if you have someone that is a manager of managers who happens to host a lot of foreign national talent in their teams, that's also a good person to go and talk to and set up these calls with because they're hiring and they're also a third party to the relationship between talent acquisition and global mobility and HR if need be to cascade information and such. Great. I would love us to talk a little bit more about immigration assessments in detail and what that really entails because I think like this is one of the key crossover points between recruiting and mobility. And so just thinking about like what really is going into these and what's important to consider whenever completing an assessment. If one of you wants to start, I'm not sure.
Sure,
I
I
think
can.
that,
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead,
yeah, no,
Adrian.
I was gonna throw it over to you. I get
Oh,
it's
okay.
yeah, yeah, go ahead.
So assessments are a new, well, not new, but getting a pre-assessment is new for us. Newer, I should say, within like the past three-ish years. And it's been a game changer. So before, again, we've already kind of talked about it, offers had to be rescinded if we didn't have all of the details and all of our ducks in a row with our immigration partners. The pre-assessment and even into the assessment portion is, let's make sure what does their passport say? Let's clear them first. Let's make sure that we can engage with them before we even start that interview process. Just so that way we know upfront whether or not we don't want to waste anybody's time, basically. It has really changed the game to being a thoughtful interview process, a thoughtful partnership with immigration, with our hiring managers, with leadership, with our HR partners. So that way everybody's in the know of who we're hiring, how many work authorizations are we really getting to around the end of the year or even every quarter, and understanding, from a financial and budgetary perspective, what the organization's going to be spending. So I think having those immigration assessments up front has really, really helped a smooth process actually for anybody from a cross-functional perspective that's in play and has a stake in the game when it comes to this.
Yeah, and from the global mobility side, the process, the assessment isn't necessarily, that's fairly quickly. We can kind of get through that. Yeah, usually within a business day or two is standard like SLA that we have with our third party company for global immigration. Indeed is lucky to have their U.S. immigration team in-house, and so they do function. We have our Indy legal team that kind of covers that, and so when we were working or when I was doing U.S. immigration, they had built out just an amazing one pager, depending on the type of role that we were assessing, to where it just kind of broke down everything into from education to years of experience and the type of role that you were assessing them against, to provide just very quick responses. Sometimes we'd be able to do an assessment within the same day, right? And so that just kind of goes a long way and provides a better experience not only for the candidate but also for the recruiter. They don't have to wait. They can continue moving the process along if it's something that if they receive an approval for these assessments. But yeah, I mean, as far as from the global immigration side of things, just ensuring that we are ensuring that the third party company is sticking to the SLAs, because we're essentially at that point the middleman. We submit the assessment request over to them, and then we're also at that point on on a waiting period, and so we just want to ensure that we get a response back as early as possible to to continue the process for the recruitment team. But yeah, I mean, it really, and also at that point, just there's any questions or concerns, especially if there's an assessment that doesn't pass, being adding some details to that, not just saying no, they didn't pass and move along. educating the recruiter a little bit so that just, they start to get used to, some of these reasons. And little by little, we had some recruiters that would, kind of start figuring it kind of out on their own and like the type of information that we would need, especially if there's like something that was lacking or missing from the assessment. And again, sometimes if all this is done just through the system and through emails, that can just add another day or two. And if you have another question, that can just add another day or two. So, little by little, our recruiters we just had a stronger communication and, things just became started going a lot smoother. But yeah, just ensuring that everything is provided initially will just ensure a smoother process, really.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am just going to touch on a few items that I think can make a difference in the assessment process. And of course, everyone should discuss this with their own immigration counsel and see what the recommendation is from with whom they have that client vendor relationship already. But I have noticed a difference because I've seen immigration assessments done differently at every company I've ever been at. And something that makes a difference is whether or not either recruiters or the immigration counsel themselves are prompted to request some immigration documentation from the candidate up front so that they're actually looking at real government documents. Like, are they looking at an EAD? Are they looking at an I-797? Are they looking at an I-20? Or are they just trusting what information the candidate gave them, which is oftentimes incorrect in my experience. So if you're looking at an actual legal document that has the information, that has the dates and everything, you can be sure that your assessment is more accurate in that way. And then also the different types of questions that are asked in the assessment, like backup options. So, for example, if someone is currently in F1 status, do they have an H-1B spouse who also has an approved I-140 that later they could switch to H-4 if the F1 runs out? That's a very specific example, but it happens not, often enough, a few times a year at least, that particular scenario. So it's not just looking at the documentation, but it's the types of questions that are being asked. And that's definitely something to weigh the pros and cons of how in-depth you want those assessments to be with your legal counsel, as well as any internal business stakeholders to see what level of risk they're comfortable with as far as disclosing information. So slightly in a similar direction, but slightly different here is I would like us to talk about the perm resume review process, because this is a hot button issue in, I think, every TA and GM team. So who should be doing this? Should it be the talent acquisition team? Should it be the hiring manager? Should it be the global mobility function? Adrian, I would actually love for you to start with this one because you have the most experience in this realm, and I think you've seen like so many different sides and facets of it. So I would love for you to share your input on this.
Yeah, yeah. So I mentioned earlier, perm was my initial what I started with when I joined the global mobility team, and the reason for bringing me on specifically was because of my recruitment background, and a part of this. For anybody that's maybe not too familiar with perm, a part of the process is to post positions online, and then you have to essentially review applications that are coming through for this position. And so the goal is it's pretty much the opposite of recruiting here. Is the goal is to find that there are no candidates that qualify for this position. Obviously, that doesn't always happen. And so, you want to remain within the legal boundaries of this process here. But I guess the reason that they decided to hire me was because of the fact that we are doing a ton of resume reviews. You had some requisitions that were posted for this process that were, getting well over 200, 300 applications, and the person who was doing this before was not comfortable doing that. It was a lot. And so getting either a recruiter, somebody from the recruitment side of things that's maybe still in TA is an option, absolutely. But again, it's definitely a lot of work, and if it's an additional task for them to do without them really focusing on maybe a quota that they have to meet or something like that, this can become maybe a duty that they're not necessarily, or that just it's just not a popular thing to do, really. And so I think the way our team at Indeed handled it was probably a really great strategy. It was not probably, it was a great strategy because, they just opened up a space in their team dedicated to this process and then hired somebody with a recruitment background to do it. And whether that was me or any other recruiter who was just used to resume reviews, it worked out, right? And it panned out. And so the other thing that I would like to dive into is really just if you are kind of offsetting this duty just to TA and not necessarily absorbing it into your global mobility program, the communication between, the TA team and the legal team that's going to be reviewing these for you prior to them submitting these. So all of these results get sent out to the Department of Labor for review. And it's essentially the company saying, hey, we posted the position. We didn't find any qualified candidates. Here is our reasoning behind every candidate that did not meet qualification for the position. So you're talking about well over 200, again, 300 applications that you have to provide a legitimate reason as to why they did not qualify for this position. So it's very tedious. The answers cannot be vague. They gotta be very specific. You can loop in the hiring manager of that person that you're trying to sponsor, reach out to them, let them know, hey, this is a role that essentially would live in your team, but we're trying to filter out these candidates. Or sometimes they even have to do, part of the process is that they would have to interview them as well. So if you already did the initial interview, they have to do an interview, and then they'll be able to phase them out or move them along the process if they do meet those qualifications. And so, yeah, it can get pretty heavy. To answer the question specifically, who should actually own this? I think the way Indeed has it down and giving it specifically to global mobility, and then the global mobility team having a position specifically focusing on that is probably a very smart way of doing it. If you don't have that already, if you don't have that luxury and you are needing to rely on the TA team, you just got to make sure that the communication with the legal team is extremely open, because they are going to be very meticulous about the information that they're going to send to the Department of Labor. So if you feel like you might get some questions as to, like, okay, we have over 300 applications, you have all these reasonings, and they may flag 100 of those responses that that you already did. And so you're having to dig into that. You're having to dig into your interview notes. You can avoid a lot of this by just having a very close relationship with legal from the get-go, understanding what the requirements are for like every single position, and then really just knowing a lot of the times a person did not qualify, but it's how you worded your reasoning as to why they're flagging it, right? And so then you get into the conversation with them, and they're like, okay, well, just say what you just said. You said this other ambiguous answer that leaves room for the DOL to question you. And so that's pretty much it. It is pretty heavy. It's quite a bit, but those would be my options, really. If you're having to do it alone, or if you have the ability to add somebody to your team.
Thank you so much, Adrian. That is a wealth of information. I know we're coming up on time, and I still want us to have time to answer some of the Q&A questions. So I am going to ask each of you, Heather and Adrian, to share one piece of wisdom that you'd like to leave with the audience today.
I'll go. Mine's short but sweet, actually. I think if everyone puts the new hires experience first, everything else will fall into place. You'll work together, you'll be proactive. And all of those action items, I mean, and we know there are a laundry list of action items that need to happen for all of this to come together. They'll get taken care of. So that would be my word of wisdom.
Thank you.
Same. No, I'm kidding. So I would say, don't let a bad experience go to waste. Dive into that. Maybe not the same day or the day after, because there's probably going to be some people that need a cool off, right? But learn from that experience and, build from there. We talked about it earlier. We kind of hammered it away of just how important the communication piece is. But, and also don't be afraid to break things. Sometimes things need to be broken in order for it to fix and to expose and poke holes in things, right? And question why the process is the way it is. And maybe there's an easier way to do it for everybody, right? And so, but yeah, that's it. Just learn from the experiences and don't let a bad one go to waste because there's absolutely a lot of wisdom in just within those experiences.
Thank you for that. I will add my own, which is going to be to not underestimate the power of relationship building. There is so much value to be had by just talking to the people that you're working with on a daily basis. And I think it's easy since a lot of us are working from home at least part of the time, if not the full time. It's easier now to just kind of like forget that you're interacting with other humans on the other end of the computer screen. And so whenever you're like stuck in this flow of work every day and you're just like, okay, I have these 10 foreign nationals to get out the door today. It can be, you can forget that there are other people working on this with you and we're all working towards a common goal. And sometimes just having those informal coffee chats, setting up a one-on-one for 15 minutes with someone that either you've never talked to before in the office or someone that you've only emailed with, but you would like to have a better, easier flow in relationship with really goes a long way. So that's what I will leave you with. And I want to take another moment to thank everybody again for showing up. I think this was a super informative session. If you have follow-up questions, feel free to reach out on the Ascend Community Slack channel or to me separately, and I can help direct you to some answers. And I appreciate everybody's time, and I wish you all a great rest of your week. Thank you. Bye.